I still remember the way the sunlight hit the pavement that afternoon. Warm, soft, almost gentle. It should have been a peaceful moment. It should have been one of those simple, comforting times when you step out of the car, stretch your legs, and feel grateful to be home. But instead, the sight waiting for me on the street took the breath right out of my chest. My things, my clothes, my photo albums, my books, the quilt my mother stitched by hand, the dishes I'd collected over 40 years were scattered across the sidewalk like garbage someone forgot to pick up. Some were in boxes, some had been tossed loose, and some were already cracked, chipped, or broken. At first, I thought maybe something terrible had happened. A burst pipe, a fire scare, a gas leak. Something urgent, something that would make sense. But then I saw her, my daughter-in-law, standing on the porch, arms crossed, looking down at me like she was supervising an inconvenience instead of standing over the pieces of my life. "We decided to do some cleaning," she said, "and all these things are useless." Useless. 48 years of a life. 48 years of memories. 48 years of holding a family together through storms they never even knew about. And there she was, tossing it out like old newspapers. I stood there, frozen in place, trying to understand how a woman I opened my home to, a woman I welcomed, fed, supported, and defended could do something like this. And what hurt even more wasn't her words. It was the silence behind the door, the silence of my son. I kept waiting for him to appear, to say something, to help, to stop her, to defend me. But he didn't. Not then. Not when I picked up my cracked photo frame from the ground. Not when my clothes spilled out onto the wet patch of the sidewalk. Not when I whispered his name under my breath, desperate for him to say, "Mom, this is a mistake." Nothing. And as I stood there, 68 years old, tired from the grocery bags I still had in the car, surrounded by strangers' curious eyes and pieces of my life scattered around me, I felt something I never thought I'd feel from my own family. Rejection. Real, sharp, humiliating rejection. But this isn't a story about things thrown on the street. It isn't just about disrespect. It isn't even just about a heartless daughter-in-law or a silent son. This story is about everything that led up to that moment, every quiet shift in behavior, every small disrespect that I ignored, every time I stepped aside to keep the peace, every moment that pushed me further and further out of my own home. It's about the truth I discovered, one that changed everything. It's about the consequences they never expected to face. It's about the day my daughter-in-law thought she had won, and the day she realized the ground she stood on was never hers to claim. And by the end of this story, the same woman who called my life useless will be standing in front of me, begging for forgiveness she never thought she'd need. But before any of that happened, before the tears, before the confrontation, before the truth shook the entire house, it started with that day, with me standing on the street, staring at the pieces of who I used to be. And if you've ever felt pushed aside, if you've ever felt unappreciated, if you've ever been made to feel small in the home you helped build, then please, before we go deeper, take a second to like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to this channel. It keeps stories like mine alive, and it reminds people like us that our voices still matter. Now, let me take you back to the beginning, to the first little signs I ignored, the ones that now seem so obvious. because nothing like this happens suddenly. It builds, quietly, slowly, until one day, everything is on the street. When I bent down to lift the first box off the sidewalk, I felt something crack inside me, not in my back, not in my hands, but somewhere deep in my chest. I'd always believed that no matter how unkind the world became, your children, the ones you carried, fed, loved, would never let you be thrown away. But there I was, picking up pieces of my life, like street trash. A neighbor driving past slowed down, staring at me with those eyes people give when they don't know whether to pity you or pretend they didn't see anything. I forced a smile at them, though my lips were shaking. Then I heard the front door slam open behind me. It was her, my daughter-in-law, Melissa. She stood at the edge of the porch with her arms folded across her chest, like I was some stranger who had wandered onto private property. "I told you not to bring that stuff back inside," she said. "We finally got the house clean." I straightened up slowly, my knees cracking, and I looked at her. "Clean?" I whispered. "That's my life you threw out here." She rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. It's old junk. You don't even use half of it." Old junk. The quilt my mother stitched with her own hands before she passed. The photo albums I guarded like gold. My wedding dishes, chipped, maybe, but filled with years of birthdays and holidays. My books, the ones I used to read to my son when he was little. Useless, she called them, useless. I took a breath. "Where is Michael? I need to talk to him." She shrugged. "At work. He told me to go ahead with the cleaning. He agrees it was time." Those words struck deeper than anything she'd said before. He agrees. My son. The boy who used to cling to my dress when he was scared. The young man who cried when he left for college because he didn't want me to feel lonely. The man whose first apartment I scrubbed top to bottom before he moved in. That same son agreed to let his wife throw my things on the street like garbage. I whispered, No, he wouldn't say that." But when Melissa looked at me, she had confidence in her eyes. Too much confidence. That wasn't the look of someone exaggerating. That was the look of someone who knew she had permission. Something inside me began to tremble. Not anger, not fear, something heavier. Something like heartbreak. She came down the steps and nudged one of the boxes with her foot. "You can take whatever you want, but it's not coming back inside. We're reorganizing the house. It needs to be modern, minimal, fresh, minimal, fresh." Like I was a stain, an outdated decoration that didn't belong. I knelt back down, ignoring the stabbing in my knees, and gently picked up the quilt. It smelled like the cedar chest it had lived in for decades. I held it against me, and for a moment, I thought of my mother. If she could see this, if she could see me kneeling on the ground at 68 years old while strangers walked by, she'd tell me to stand up, to remember my worth, to breathe. I folded the quilt carefully and placed it back into the box. And that's when Melissa sighed loudly behind me. "You know, if you just let us handle things, life would be easier," she said. "You're always so emotional about every little thing." I looked up at her slowly. "Every little thing?" I repeated. "These are my memories." "Yeah," she answered, "but they're just things, and they're cluttering the house." Michael and I talked about it for a long time. You need to learn to let go. Let go. People say that like it's simple, like letting go of 40 years of your life is the same as letting go of an old receipt or a broken cup. I didn't want to argue. My voice wasn't strong enough yet, so I said nothing. I kept picking up the boxes one by one, setting aside anything fragile, anything that would break even more than I already felt. When I reached the last box, the heavy one, I opened it and froze. Inside was a small wooden jewelry box with a brass latch. My husband gave it to me on our 10th anniversary. He had passed away years ago, but I kept that box close. It held every love letter, every small note he ever wrote me, things I never let anyone touch. My hand shook when I lifted it out. This wasn't clutter. This wasn't useless. This was a piece of my heart. I clutched it to my chest and stood up. Did you throw this out too? She shrugged casually. I mean, yeah, we don't even know what's in it. Probably junk. You can keep it if you want, but it's not going back inside. That was the moment something changed inside me. A shift so sharp I felt it like a snap in my ribs. I said quietly, "Melissa, why are you doing this?" She looked at me again with that same cold detachment. It's not why, it's what has to be done. You're living in our space, and we need it the way we want it. Simple. Our space. Our. That word hit me like ice water down my back. I stared at her long enough that she finally grew uncomfortable. She crossed her arms tighter and looked away. I knew then, this wasn't just cleaning. This was control. This was territory. This was her way of showing me that she was the woman of the house. And I was just a guest in a home I had paid for. A home where every wall had been painted by my own hands. A home where I raised my son. A home that held every memory I had left. I didn't say a word. Silence can be louder than shouting when you choose it carefully. I gathered my boxes, pushed them to the side, and sat on the porch step. Melissa went back inside without offering help, without looking back. I sat there long after the door closed. The afternoon sun lowered. Cars went by. A dog barked nearby. And I sat there, still, quiet, trying to understand how the people you love can turn into people you barely recognize. Eventually, the lock clicked. Michael came home. I heard his footsteps before I saw him. Firm, tired, heavy. He walked out onto the porch, saw me sitting there, and frowned. "Mom, why are you out here? Why are all your boxes?" Before he finished the sentence, Melissa stepped behind him and slipped her arms around his waist. "I told you she'd make a big deal out of it," she said sweetly. He looked between her and me, confused, but not enough. Not confused enough. Not shocked. Not angry. Just neutral, like he already expected this. "Mom," he said, rubbing his forehead, "we talked about this. The house needs reorganizing." I asked softly, "You and I never talked about this." He hesitated, just 1 second, but it was enough. Enough to show me he'd been avoiding the conversation because he knew it would hurt me. "Melissa said you'd understand," he said quietly. "It's not a big deal. We're just trying to make the home look more modern." Home. He said home, but not my home, not our home, their home. Something inside me sank like a stone. "Michael," I whispered, "do you think my things are useless?" He looked away. He didn't answer. And silence. Well, silence sometimes answers more honestly than words ever could. I stood up, holding my jewelry box, and I said, "All right, I see." And I did see. I saw everything clearly for the first time in years. I saw how slowly I'd been pushed aside. Not with cruelty at first, but with small comments, small changes, small decisions made without me. A shelf removed. A picture taken down. My chair replaced with a new one. My kitchen things moved. My routines disrupted. I had brushed it off because when you love people, you forgive the first 100 cuts before you even realize you're bleeding. But standing there with my memories tossed into boxes on the sidewalk, I finally understood the pattern. I finally understood their plan. I finally understood my place in their eyes. I didn't cry. Not then. The tears came later, but not then. Right then, I simply picked up my jewelry box, turned away from them, and walked down the porch steps. My legs were weak, but my heart was strangely calm. Sometimes the moment you are treated like you don't matter is the moment you start remembering that you do. And as I walked down the driveway, passing the boxes that held decades of my life, I made a quiet promise to myself, to my husband's memory, to the woman I once was. This wasn't the end of the story. Not yet, because they didn't know something very important, something that would shake their world later. They didn't know the truth about the house, who it belonged to, whose name was on the papers, whose savings bought it, whose hands built it up from nothing. They thought I was powerless. They thought I was disposable. But their moment of discovery was coming. Not today, not even tomorrow, but soon. And when that moment arrived, when the truth finally came out, every box on that sidewalk, every word Melissa said, every silence from my son would come crashing back at them with the force of a lifetime. And it would happen in a way none of them expected. The day everything unraveled didn't come with shouting. It didn't come with storms or slammed doors. It came on a morning so quiet, so ordinary, that anyone watching would have thought nothing significant could ever happen in such stillness. But sometimes the quietest days hold the loudest shifts. It was 3 weeks after the boxes on the street incident. 3 long weeks of me keeping to myself, moving silently through the house like a shadow. I didn't touch anything unless necessary, didn't rearrange a single spoon or wipe a single countertop unless they asked. I became invisible. It's strange how fast people get used to treating you like you don't exist. Melissa walked around like she owned every inch of the house. Michael avoided eye contact most days, choosing convenience over conscience. And I watched, not to be sneaky, not to spy, but because something inside me was settling, not breaking, no, settling, like dust after a collapse. That morning, I woke up before sunrise, as I always did. Habit is a strong thing at my age. Routine becomes a kind of anchor when life feels unsteady. I made myself a cup of tea, sat in the corner of the living room, the only corner they hadn't redecorated for a more modern look, as Melissa liked to say, and I listened to the quiet. Then I heard their voices, soft but not soft enough. Melissa was whispering in the kitchen. Her words carried just enough for me to catch pieces. Once she's out, we'll finally have the space. You said we agreed. She's getting too comfortable again. My hand tightened around my mug. Getting too comfortable. In my own home. Michael's voice followed, low and unsure. Just don't start anything today, okay? Mom's been staying out of the way. No scenes. No scenes. As if my pain was a performance. I didn't move. I didn't stand up. I just listened. Then Melissa said the one sentence that pushed the entire day into motion. Once the refinance goes through, everything will finally be official. I froze. Refinance? Official? I knew exactly what that meant. They weren't just trying to move me out emotionally. They were trying to do it legally. They were planning to change ownership. Without me, I sat there for a long moment, my breath caught in my throat, my heart beating harder than it had in years. Not because of fear, but because of something else. Because they didn't know. They didn't know the one thing that made their entire plan impossible. The house wasn't theirs to refinance. It wasn't even partly theirs. The house was mine, bought with my money, signed under my name, protected by a will my husband and I drafted years before he passed. A will kept in the very drawer they never bothered checking. The drawer they once said was just filled with old papers. My husband used to joke, "One day it'll save you a lot of trouble." I never imagined the trouble would come from my own son. I stood up slowly, steadying myself against the wall. My legs had grown weaker over the years, but that morning they felt strong, stronger than they had in a long time. Something inside me was waking up. I walked down the hallway toward the kitchen, and as soon as they saw me, their whispers stopped like someone had cut a wire. Melissa crossed her arms. Michael looked anywhere but at me. I said softly, "Good morning." Melissa replied, "Hi," with that overly sweet tone people use when they're pretending. Then, as if she couldn't help herself, she added, "Try not to make a mess today, okay? I want the house looking presentable. The appraiser is coming." The appraiser. So they hadn't just talked about refinancing. They had already started. I nodded gently, like her words didn't pierce through me. "Of course, dear," I said softly. "I won't be in the way." She smiled, that smug little smile I had come to recognize painfully well, and walked past me. But Michael, he lingered. "Mom," he said quietly, "just today, please don't cause any tension. We really need this to go smoothly." I looked at him, really looked at him. My son, my only child, the baby I once rocked to sleep, the boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard, saying, "This one reminded me of you, Mama." Now, this man worried about tension, not about me. I placed my hand on his arm gently. "All right," I whispered, "no tension from me." He let out a relieved breath and walked away, and I stood there calm, calmer than I should have been, considering what they were trying to do. But I knew something they didn't know, something that was about to surface. When the doorbell rang an hour later, Melissa rushed to open it. The appraiser stepped in, polite and professional, clipboard in hand. Melissa gestured grandly. "Please come in. This is our home." Our home. Those two words had never held so many lies. The appraiser began taking notes, walking through rooms, asking standard questions. Melissa answered everything confidently, until he asked the one question she couldn't wiggle past. Whose name is on the deed? She laughed lightly. Oh, my husband's, Michael Thompson. The appraiser nodded. And the co-owner? She smiled again. Just him. I'm his wife. I watched, silent, still. The appraiser flipped through his documents, then paused, then frowned. Actually, he said, that's odd. The paperwork here lists a different name entirely. Melissa blinked. What? He looked at the document again. Yes, ownership shows as Margaret Evelyn Thompson. The room froze. Melissa's face drained of color. Michael, who had just walked into the room, went still like someone had pressed pause on him. My heart stayed steady, surprisingly steady. The appraiser looked up at them. Are you Margaret? I stepped forward gently. Yes, I said, I am. Michael's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Melissa looked like she'd swallowed glass. The appraiser continued, unaware of the emotional earthquake he'd just triggered. Ma'am, I'll need your signature if this house is to be refinanced. Only the legal owner or listed co-owners can authorize changes. Silence, the kind that rings in your ears, the kind that cracks the ground beneath people. I turned to look at them, at my own son, at the woman who had thrown my life onto the street. And for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't the one trembling. They were. Melissa stammered. Wait, there has to be a mistake. Michael told me. There's no mistake, I said quietly. This house is mine. It always has been. The appraiser looked uncomfortable. Should I come back later? I smiled kindly. Yes, dear, that would be best. He nodded and left, and the moment the door shut, the house, my house, became the quietest it had ever been. Michael sank onto a chair like his legs gave out. Melissa stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. Why didn't you say anything? Michael whispered. I looked at him, my voice steady. You never asked. Michael sat there, his hands shaking slightly, staring at the floor as if all the answers were written in the grain of the wood. Melissa stood frozen near the doorway, her confidence stripped clean off her, like someone had peeled away a mask she'd worn too long. I breathed in slowly and exhaled even slower. The weight of years, all the little hurts I'd tucked away, felt like they were drifting off my shoulders. Not because the pain was gone, but because the truth finally had a place to stand. Melissa spoke first. Her voice came out small, unfamiliar, nothing like the woman who used to speak to me, like I was clutter taking up space. Why didn't you tell us the house was yours? Why stay quiet? I looked at her for a long moment. She was still young, still learning what life can take from you and what it can teach you. But youth isn't an excuse for cruelty. Because I didn't think you were planning to push me out, I said softly, I didn't know, until the day my things were on the street. Her eyes flickered. She looked away. And when you said they were useless, that's when I realized the truth. Not about the house, about you. She swallowed hard. Michael lifted his head. Finally, he looked tired, older, like a man who had just realized he'd spent years walking in the wrong direction. "Mom," he whispered, "I never wanted to hurt you. I thought she and I needed a fresh start. I thought you were strong enough to handle the changes." I nodded slowly. "That's the problem, sweetheart. You thought I could handle being pushed aside. So you let it happen. You stood by and watched." Tears filled his eyes. "Mom, I'm sorry." The words didn't fix anything, but they landed softly. For the first time in a long time, they didn't feel overdue. They felt honest. "Sorry doesn't erase the past," I said gently, "but it can shape what comes next." Melissa wiped her eyes. "I shouldn't have spoken to you the way I did. I treated you like you didn't matter. I swear it won't happen again." I didn't answer right away. Forgiveness is a delicate thing. It doesn't show up fully formed. It arrives in pieces, slowly, cautiously. I walked toward the kitchen, the room that had become the center of all tension, the same room where I had stood years earlier beside my husband, where we had laughed, cooked, argued, raised a family, held birthdays, mourned losses, shared meals that tasted like home. I placed my hand on the counter. Slowly, deliberately, Melissa watched nervously. Michael held his breath, and I said quietly, "This is the last time we're going to live with secrets. If you want to stay here, you stay with respect. If you want me in your life, then treat me like someone who belongs in it." They nodded, both of them, not out of fear this time, but understanding. We sat together for a long time after that, not talking, just sitting. Sometimes silence is not a punishment. Sometimes it's the first step to healing. Later that evening, Michael made dinner. For the first time in months, he asked me what I would like to eat. Melissa set the table carefully, quietly watching me as if studying the right way to move around someone she'd hurt. And as we ate, the three of us, the house felt different. Not because everything was fixed, but because something had finally shifted. A doorway had opened, a small one, a fragile one, but it was open. As the night grew quieter and the lights dimmed, I went to my room, closed the door gently behind me, and let myself breathe in the peace that had been gone for so long. I thought about my husband, what he would have said if he were here. Probably something simple like, "Maggie, you handled it. You always do." I smiled at that. And now, to you, listening to my story, I want to say something from my heart. If you've ever been mistreated in your own home, if you've ever felt unwanted by the people you love, if you've ever stayed quiet just to keep the peace, please remember this. Your worth does not depend on how others treat you. Your strength does not disappear just because someone refuses to see it. And your life, your story, still belongs to you. If this story touched you even a little, I'd be grateful if you liked this video, shared it, and subscribed. Your support keeps stories like mine alive. It lets people like me, people who've gone silent for too long, finally have a voice again. Thank you for listening. Truly.